See, I am not your host, Kevin Mears. He's homesick tonight, and we wish him uh, speed in recovering. Hope you're feeling better soon. I am Brian McKinley, vampire author. So, welcome to Paranormal Encyclopedia, now with 50% fewer calories. So, as a special pseudo guest, we have our producer, Beth, who's going to come out here in a minute and be part of our discussion on the Fae, or fairies, and leprechauns, and all of that good St. Patrick's Day stuff. Since it's not quite St. Patrick's Day yet, we're jumping the gun a little bit, but next week we have a guest. So, all right. So Beth, you want to come out? All right. Meanwhile, I'll juggle and dangle keys for your enjoyment. We don't know. We don't know what our audience is composed of. Everybody say hi to Beth. Yay. All right. So, I'll get started. We all know I printed out some notes here. Some stuff. Yep, because I like notes. Unlike Kevin, who likes to just say stuff all completely off the top of his head, I have a terrible memory, so if I try to do that, I wind up just stumbling and, trying to remember words. So now I have some stuff that allows me to actually speak with some intelligence about the Fae. So, fairies, a lot of people think of them in connection with Ireland, but they actually are from all over the place. The legends that we currently have their roots apparently in everywhere from Great Britain to France to Germany. Creatures like elves really are more of a Germanic thing.
That would actually depend on a couple of things, considering all the different syncretisms that have happened over time.
Well, yeah. Invasions, fun cultural adaptations, and appropriations and whatnot notwithstanding. I'm going back to like the original, some of the original stuff. So there's different theories apparently on what fairies are. In Christian belief and mythology, and naturally Kevin could say more about this than I can, but it looks like here it says that a lot of times fairies in Christian mythology were believed to be demonic entities or sort of demoted angels, things of that nature. Fun stuff. Spirits that were sort of neither, good nor evil, kind of elementals, things like that. Pagan deities that had been demoted, after Christianity had overcome the area. And in a lot of cases, sometimes they're thought to be the spirits of the dead. The term she, which is a common in Ireland, is from a word from the underworld, meaning the people of the mound, and the mound essentially being the burial mound, a portal and passage to the underworld. So it was believed that the Fae were actually spirits of the dead coming back to do things like that.
Well, that would actually depend on which Fae you are in reference to, because the mound was the essential physical aspect of.
Yeah, this is like the
so
sort of Ireland, Scottish.
Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and even England at one point in time. So we're also running a little experiment tonight of seeing if this tablet will actually work properly.
Ooh.
I can't see how that's actually working, so.
Yarr.
This thing is stupid.
So let's see. Boy, this is gonna be a rough night. So The Tuatha De Danann, and I'm probably butchering that horribly because it's Irish, or I should say Gaelic. Tuatha De, yeah. Race of supernaturally gifted people in Irish mythology. Thought to represent the main deities of pre-Christian Gaelic Ireland. Many of the Irish tales of them refer to them as being fairies, though in more ancient times they were regarded as gods and goddesses. They were spoken of as having come from the islands in the north of the world, or in other sources from the sky, after being defeated in a series of battles with otherworldly beings. And then by the ancestors of the current Irish people, they were said to have withdrawn to the fairy mounds where they lived on in the popular imagination as fairies. That's
Which, to anybody who follows up on their Tolkien, will see a lot of parallels.
yeah. Well, Tolkien was very big into mythology and wove a lot of actual mythology into his.
Well, that's true, and it wasn't just the local mythology of England, Ireland, and all that. It was also Norse as well. That's why we have the dwarves as they are and things like that. One of the examples of various deities in that area, specifically in the Celtic areas, is Bridget, who was the goddess of the, was essentially a blacksmith, essentially, goddess of smiths and other things as well. I'm not that up on her mythology, bad on me. But when it comes to that, and then there was another reference. Actually, since we're also supposed to be talking about angels tonight as well.
Are we? Like as I said earlier, everything I know about angels came from the prophecy movies. So if you want to talk about Christopher Walken, I'm all.
We can do that.
I'm all for it.
I did grow up in a Catholic house. Well, let me rephrase. Majority of my family is Catholic. Me and my mom are not. And I was essentially raised from the broom closet, as it were. But I still had plenty of Catholic influences and some Jewish influences as well. Not so much.
Guilt from both sides.
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually found out recently, simply because I never saw my grandmother praying all that often, and she did this shortly after my grandfather had passed last year. She was trying to find this one picture, and she's like, I'm gonna pray to it was either Michael or Saint Anthony, one of the two. But apparently you pray to them, according to Catholics, you pray to them in order to find something that's lost.
Oh yeah, I think is that Michael? Is the lost items?
It is.
I can't remember.
Something like that.
I know it's yeah. I think it is Michael. He's also like the patron saint of policemen and stuff like that.
Kind of. I've seen more to war in general.
Or was that Christopher? See, I don't know anything about angels. This is why I didn't want to talk about angels.
It was actually kind of funny because I was talking with my one sister about it, and she's like, well, the equivalent would also be as if you were praying to Hermes, a Greek legend as well. It's a similar concept. And she was able to find it. She found it the next day in the one box that she kept not looking in, and it was right there. And it's like,
of course,
yeah, and it happens, and that happens to everybody. But I think it was rather because she wasn't the big prayer. She's not the big prayer in our family, at least not obviously so. That was my great grandmother, who was her and her brothers came off the boat from Italy, essentially. So, and somewhere I have cousins in the Vatican, so we don't hear from them.
All right. Well, to anybody out there, usually Kevin does this at the half hour. I'm going to throw this out now because obviously we need desperate help, and if any audience members want to call in and talk to us or complain or ask questions or just ramble on, the number is 609-807-2492. Call or actually. We don't have the laptop out right now, so I can't see comments on Facebook. Oh, of course. we didn't get it ready. Okay. Beth has her phone out, so she
I had
might
up
be
with the
able.
face. It
Yes.
sometimes screws up though.
So she might be able to see your comments on Facebook and respond. But anyway, so one of the reasons that we wanted you, especially to be on here for this episode, is you have said in the past you have had actual dealings with like what you believe are fae or and have some knowledge of. So talk about that, because the theoretical is all well and good, but obviously I pulled this stuff up off the internet, fairly quickly. Anybody out there can do the same. So that's not hugely interesting to talk about. I just wanted to lay down some background. But talk about some of your experiences and the practical end of it.
Okay, so my interactions that are directly with fae. Well, to anybody who is familiar with fae, there's a couple of key rules. One is don't accept anything. Don't just randomly pick something up, especially if you are not one of them, because it can be taken as stealing. This becomes important. And let's see, stay on the path. And oh yes, if you come back once, someone's looking out for you. Or if you come back once, it's a coincidence. Clearly they didn't want you that bad. Come back twice.
Now you're saying come back from. You might want to specify, because some people
if you come back from the
follow.
Faelands. If you find yourself in the Faelands and you end up coming back to our world.
Okay, so that is someplace that you can travel to. You
Sort of, yes. It's more like an astral projection sort of thing.
okay? So you think it's not a physical; it's more of a mental.
While you're there, it's very much might as well be as hard as like you or this table.
Oh, okay. So it feels completely real. When you okay, because I've seen like there's a guy on Facebook or not on Facebook. Yeah, well, he was on Facebook and YouTube talking about it. And I didn't get his name, and I should have actually, especially for this thing, I was gonna see if I could contact him. But he's got this whole video series about visiting the Fae lands and having spoken to fairies, and he brings back messages from them, and like says, like this king that he met there.
Yeah, no, they still have their monarchies in place. That's not going away anytime soon. But a lot
so
of
that
them,
sounds legit to you.
Yeah, no, that's and
Okay.
they also have like the little mayoral towns and everything else like
Oh, wow.
we do here. Yeah, no, they're not the folksy little people that we grew up with our watered down fairy stories. They're actually some of them are able to traverse over. Case in point, leprechauns are actually able to come around. They do sometimes visit in certain areas, mostly in Ireland, of course.
Yeah. So what's the real deal with leprechauns? Because obviously that story has been like ripped apart and bastardized and turned into this silly thing of short guys with beards and funny hats and pots of gold, and I don't think the reality is probably anything. There was a very interesting take on them in American Gods, which I found pretty cool. That's a good show.
I haven't seen American Gods, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what the comparisons are there.
Well, there you go. So tell me what you know of as the reality of leprechauns. I'm curious to see how.
So I
how
myself
right
haven't
they got
actually
it.
encountered a leprechaun. When it comes to leprechauns, what's actually this is actually legitimate. There is actually they are actually considered an endangered species in a part of Ireland.
Don't shoot the leprechauns.
And it's
Whatever
actually
you
because
do, man.
and it's also to preserve the lands that they live in.
Okay.
The background of the leprechaun is there's essentially two schools of thought on what the name itself means. In one region, it means a little body, specifically referring to water. In another form of Gaelic, or another point in time in that particular strain of Gaelic, it also meant shoemaker, which is why you often see them, cobbling.
Okay, yeah, because I've heard of them like brownies and
Brownies are a
cobblers
separate.
and stuff.
Brownies are a separate thing. Brownies typically get to be a little more mischievous, but it's usually in good nature. They don't, unless you specifically piss them off, they're not going to be overly malicious. They may have a mean-spirited joke or something.
Just make little pranks and stuff.
Yeah, they're mostly tricksters. And the thing is, with the leprechaun, they're more of a essentially a walking parable, as it were, because any legend that you hear about that involves a leprechaun, 9 times out of 10, somebody's trying to trick them into giving them the pot of gold that's at the end of the rainbow, or you're trying to get their 3 wishes out of them, which if you capture them, take a trinket of theirs, something that they hold dear, releasing them or that item back to the person is supposed to get you 3 wishes. And it's supposed to be the moral of the story at the end, because it always comes about in the worst way, is don't try to take the quick way to get what you want. You have to work for it, because he certainly worked hard to get what he needs, you know, and he has every right to, when, you know, you get the 3 wishes from him, that, you know, or if you get his gold, that it's not going to be in the best of ways possible.
Yeah.
Which also comes to when you're making a deal with the Fae.
Oh, we got a phone call.
Ooh.
Hello, who's this?
It's Kevin.
Ah, I knew it.
Hey, Kevin.
We had a
Hey,
feeling
guys.
you'd be calling in. Hello.
I had to call in and correct at least one screw up you guys made.
Which one?
So you guys are doing fine with the fairy stuff? Although, Brian, you're literally reading off of notes. Not the best thing to do.
Just a little bit, like I said, to make sure I get the because I can't remember these
I
words.
know.
He didn't have time to outline.
Yeah,
It's
I
okay.
can't remember these words the way you do.
I believe, by the way, it's Tuatha De Dan.
Okay. See,
I
I
may be wrong.
knew there'd be some kind of weird pronunciation because Gaelic doesn't sound the way it looks, and I had no idea
In
what
no
the
form,
correct.
and there's like 6 forms of Gaelic, and
Yeah.
additionally, there's
Yeah.
depending on how, and because it's not the way like we read it, where as you're going from the left, no, you have to start from the end and go to the front. So there's actually, and my sister actually had to research this for an Irish name. It's like there's a name that's like 13 to 14 characters long, but it's literally pronounced Shay.
Also, guys, yeah, Michael is the patron saint of police officers, paramedics, EMTs, exorcists.
So I was right about that.
Yes.
I couldn't remember.
Anthony is the patron saint of lost site objects.
There we go.
Christopher is the patron saint of children. Although Christopher is not actually a saint anymore. Pretty much he never
him and
existed.
Pluto are over in the corner consoling each other.
Well, funny enough, there's at least some evidence to suggest the stories of Christopher were based on the Greek god Hermes.
It makes sense.
On a lot of
Yeah.
different fronts.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be
Hermes
the
is awesome.
first. It wouldn't be the first time
Yeah.
that a pagan legend or story was turned into a Christian.
That's for a majority.
Case in point,
of
you're
it.
talking about the goddess Bridget. Or Bridget, she's also the saint, is now Saint Bridget. Although, again, the Catholic Church defense went, yeah, these saints are not actually people. They're not saints anymore.
Well, that's. I mean, I guess that makes sense if you're going to have rules for sainthood, and you find out that some of these supposed people never actually existed, you kind of have to put the foot down. All right.
Granted, there are 4 saints, and Michael's one of them that aren't people. Because the full title would be Saint Michael the Archangel.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess he gets
Gabriel,
an exception.
Raphael, and Uriel are all saints, but none of them were ever people.
Right.
At
Okay,
least in Catholic lore.
So what's your take on the angel fae connection, the Christian mythology? Since now we do have you, and I couldn't really speak to any
You
of
did
that.
okay. You did actually pretty well on that. Usually, there's a couple of theories. One is that they're the unbaptized dead before Christianity came to Ireland. Another is that they are.
Well, of course, that's what they
elementals.
would say. Come on.
I'm sorry, the Irish person in the
And
room
then
is-
there's
is
the one that
pretty
you were
solid.
alluding to. There's a theory that when Lucifer rebelled and there was a war in heaven, which you should at least have some idea of from prophecy.
A little
The
bit.
first war, not the second war, which the movie made up.
Yeah.
But part of a group of angels said no. They refused to side with God. They refused to side with Satan. So they were kicked out, but they weren't kicked into hell because they hadn't done anything wrong. They just wouldn't fight. So they were sent to Earth, and they created their own realm, which is fairy.
Oh, there we go.
Personally, I don't know which theory is true, but interestingly enough, Dante mentions the angels that wouldn't take sides. They're in the first circle of hell. The whole thing with the undecided in life have to chase banners, and the angels are carrying the banners or something like that.
Yeah, Dante had quite an imagination, but lots of fun stuff. So how are you feeling? Any better?
Getting better.
All right, good.
Still pretty miserable. I'll be up for it next week, but
Cool.
Well, that's one
you
of the
guys aren't doing too badly.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, we can try.
I'm listening in. I just had to call in and do a little heckling.
Oh, I figured we knew you were going to call in. There was nothing on earth that could stop you. So
It was just a matter of when.
yeah, but that's what I was prepared for. I figured, all right, we'll get our nonsense out of the way first, and then eventually Kevin
Wait,
will
you mean
call
we're
in.
done? The show still has like another, you know.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm pretty much just going to sit here for the rest of the show. You're on. You and Kevin
Since
can
I'm
take
here,
it from here.
and I know the most about it, I want to let everybody know real quick we're having a guest next week, which is Bishop Lainey Peterson of the Gnostic Church.
Oh, cool.
Yes. Very nice lady. I've worked with her before. She knows what she's talking about. She knows what she's doing. Should be a good interview.
Cool. So what is the Gnostic? What's the difference there?
It's the sort of thing that's going to take too long for me to explain, and I think it would be better for her to explain it.
All right, I'll ask
within
next week.
Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we
Sort
can get
of.
all that. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll ask that next week then. All right.
Yeah, like
so,
I said, let the expert talk about it instead of me.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So.
Okay. I'm going to let you go so I can lay back down. I will
right.
be listening.
All right. It was good to hear from you.
Okay.
Feel better.
Yep. Have fun.
All right. So, back to tell us about some of your you were going on before we tangented again to some of your experiences and knowledge with the Fae, because I think that's the most interesting thing, is hearing somebody's firsthand account that actually had things happen, to get an idea of what the reality is versus what, because with the tales and the folklore, they've been changed and they've been retold so many times that we probably don't have anything very close to the original anymore.
Oh yeah, trying to look up anything about a specific Fae type, it's usually really watered down and very subject to interpretation. It's the same as if you were trying to look up a specific kami in Japan, or a Duma in, for Hindu Buddhism,
Or
anything
vampires, even.
Yeah, everybody's got their own flavor of something.
Yeah.
As far as my own experiences with the Fae directly, I've been to the Faelands a couple of times. Not willingly, and by not willingly, not knowingly.
So
Consent is
describe,
important.
yeah, describe that. Because that's something
so-
interesting.
So the first time was several years ago. I didn't realize what exactly was going on, and there was this great house, and there was a party of some kind. I had no idea what was going on, or rather, I can't recollect, because again, it was so many years ago, and I didn't realize what actually happened. About 5 years ago, and I always have something like this happen around the same exact time, maybe a couple years apart. I was in that area again, and there was this huge celebration going on. And like I said, they're not as like backwards, cottagey, at least not in all parts. Some of them are a lot more modernized. Like, they actually had lockers, like we had in high school at one point. They actually have some of our instruments. They can adapt. They do have these things, especially since they're very prone to various arts and things like that. Now, in that particular instance, I had to go get something. I forget what it was. And I actually went to one of these lockers. And something fell out, which was apparently an artifact of theirs, or something of theirs that had gone missing, but they hadn't realized it was missing yet. And it falls into my hands, because it was in the thing that I was looking into. And because it fell into my hands, an alarm got raised. So I had to book it. So I'm running along, and when I had mentioned before, one of the rules of being in the Faelands is stay on the path. Just because you can see a path doesn't mean that's the actual path. If you know your and I got back to where at some point that house was, and it was in ruin. I don't know what happened. I got into the ruins, it rebuilt up around me, just as those that were chasing me came to the door. and it blocked them just before they were able to get to me, and I was able to push myself back out before actually staying around to explain everything, which would have been the smarter decision on my part. But again, I had no idea what the hell was actually going on, pardon my language. And one of them thought would be a good idea to follow me back. And because I have done energy work and whatnot, and these things are on a energy field, essentially, energy plane, as it was, I pretty much blocked it, told it to go back to its masters and tell them to leave me the hell alone.
Yeah.
Which didn't bode well. And the only reason I know that it wasn't a dream overall, that cause sometimes you have those really vivid things.
Yeah.
Is because it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And my grandparents were downstairs because they were early risers. And I heard something bang against the door to my room. And then it opened, and I heard something shuffling. And then I heard somebody coming up the steps. And I asked my grandmother, because that was who was coming up, I'm like, were you already up here? Did you stop halfway downstairs? She's like, no, this is the first time I've come up this morning. And there's no pets or anything at my grandparents' house. So it's like, oh, lovely. And then I started having the most unusual strain of bad luck, all within less than 12 hours. Went to a priestess I know, and when I told her what had happened, all she could do was face palm, and pretty much told me that because whatever I had was of such great value, they had called essentially a hunt on me. So she was able to block, and it was essentially waited out until they got distracted, which took the better part of a year.
You couldn't like return the thing, or?
I do not traverse there specifically because I know I'm going to get myself in trouble. Because you know me, and people that have heard me on this show before know how trolly I can be. You can't get that mouthy with the Fae. Because they're very, their reactions, like you can be a particular type of Fae that's usually good for like jokes and being sarcastic, but a lot of them only like it when they do it. You try giving it in return, 9 times out of 10 you're also going to be supremely outmatched in wit to begin with. If you're able to get one up over on them and you do it too many times, not allowed. That's my dealings of actually being there. Staying in the physical realm here, however, there's a particular Fae that everybody is familiar with called the Banshee.
Yeah, it's a Irish legend of a wailing woman that foretells death.
It foretells death. It also, and that's all she really does. And that is her main thing. It's essentially to give the warning that there will be a passing. It is meant to prepare you. So this way, when the time comes, and they also can travel fairly far. And typically, they'll go to the further reaching families, wail, and the way that it translates to me is you get an impression of who when you hear it. And the closer you are and the closer that time is, you'll hear it far sooner to that person. About, I would say, a little over 2 years ago, I actually heard one. I knew who it was for, but it's also a matter of most Fae, even though they, society-wise, as far as I have seen, are essentially up to, say, our tech base, or at least our construction base and things like that. Again, they're not like, little off-thatched cottages in the woods or anything like that. It's not some weird Munchkin land sort of deal. A lot of their energies, though, mainly work better in more rural areas. So you have a better chance of getting an influence in, say, outskirts of suburbia into like farmland area than you would in the middle of a major city. A lot of them, the logic stands.
They have some sort of a tie to the land.
Yeah, they do have.
Like, it seems like they have some connection with elementals and
with everything that's been put on top of it, even if it's only a physical thing, it still has an energy of its own that can deflect and can keep them from drawing from. So I was actually in the hospital with my grandfather. This is more than 6 months before he passed when I had heard it. And it's not so much as an actual, at least in my experience, a keening that I heard, but it was more of an inflection and a pressure of what was going on. We were actually in there for my grandfather's breathing issues at the time. And I'm just in there going, oh no. I know that sound. And that's all they really do. They are not able to, for example, you can't contact, say, a banshee and try to get them to tell you where somebody went, whether they were judged, or anything like that. And that's just how it stands. Additionally, when it comes to the banshee, the original legends were that they were only tied to certain families. And some legends have it that they essentially sort of faded out because people were marrying outside of the main branches and things like that, because, let's face it, nobody wins in incest with the royals and whatnot of any society. And then the other strain of thought, which is the one that I subscribe to, is that because they were married, that the people here were getting married to outside families and such, they would it would essentially spread out how far a banshee could influence. So as you can imagine, they're fairly busy on a regular basis.
Well, it would make sense. I mean, if this happened to every Irish family everywhere, it would be much more common. At least it'd be much more talked about. It'd be much more commonly believed than as some, kind of old superstition, which is how it tends to be thought of now. I mean, I've never encountered anything like that, but then again, my family's not pure Irish. I mean, I've got all kinds of stuff in
neither am I, because I'm German, Scottish, Irish, English, and Italian.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it also goes back to, is there still enough of a connection back to those? Like logically speaking, how much of a connection does your bloodline still have back to that family? How much, outmixing and whatnot? Or is there essentially a certain mark that you would have as somebody of Irish descent, things like that? So there's a lot of open speculation. It's not really looked into that much. These are just like some of my speculations on that particular strand of thought, because that one actually makes a lot more sense in that regard, and it was actually the basis of a project I was working on that actually happened to be focusing around banshees. Because even a certain Fae Legends show, before essentially the veil went up, they interacted just like you and I would interact with humans.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, like I said, I know from my vampire research where it sort of blurred over. There's the term banshee is actually Scottish, even though the thing is mostly thought of as Irish. The word apparently comes from Scottish. And there's a Leananshee or Leonshee that is Welsh Irish, and that has more in common with vampires, where they were sometimes muses who would inspire artists and kind of work them to death and feed off of their passion, and others where they were women, beautiful women that would lure travelers into their cottages and basically kill them and drink their blood and eat them.
Well, the Leonshi has a lot more similarities with Selkies, which were these types of fey creatures that, when they were in the oceans, they were seals, but at night they would come out onto the land, take off their skins. They were beautiful women.
Yeah. Kind of like the original version of mermaids, which before Disney got a hold of them, mermaids were vicious little bitches. They would basically lure sailors, to crash onto rocks and come into the water where they would drown and be eaten. And Yeah,
But
they were nasty.
but as far as your reference to the Scottish, the spellings, while they're similar, are two separate things. For Irish, banshee,
It's a type
banshee, yeah,
creature
they are.
that
Well, for the Irish, it's essentially just a keening woman.
Right.
However, over in Scotland, what you have is the little washer at the fen,
yes.
who is usually an older woman who is all gnarled and bent, and she's washing clothes, usually a shirt. And if you come across her, she will hold, and you, if you ask her what she's washing, and she'll be like, your death clothes. There's only, you can either try going in the other direction to avoid it. However, there was one little trick which apparently you have to be very brave to do because of the way that they said it's very rare somebody would actually do this. Because her covering is essentially open. If you are brave enough to go up and suck at her teat, you are considered one of her children, and she will protect you. Which I
gotta love those old legends.
Well, at that point you're considered one of her children, so it's like a mother's love.
There you go.
At that point, which I wouldn't be surprised if they sort of use as a weird reference in Ernest and the Troll or something. That Halloween movie, you know which one I'm talking about.
No, I thankfully I don't. I kind of I stopped at the first Ernest movie. That was enough for me, and Ernest Goes to Camp. Saw it, was mildly amused by it. Said, no, I don't think I need to see any of these others.
Basic cable for the win on that one.
Yeah. No, thank you. Oh my God, they're as bad as the Medea movies.
Actually, what's interesting is as much as a lot of people have, everybody knows that you have the incubus and the succubus as far as demons or specters and whatnot, and then like as a cousin to the incubus, you have the Alp over in Germany.
Yes, which we talked about with its funny hat and its penchant for sucking on toes and drinking breast milk. These are all fun things. The Germans are strange people.
Name one type of people that isn't strange.
Well, that's true. I guess you go back in our mythology, and we're all kind of screwed up.
But the thing is, like, if you compare the incubus to the succubus, right? The succubus, 9 times out of 10, when they are portrayed, are these gorgeous women and everything else. 9 times out of 10, and that's how they stay, regardless of what's going on. See a particular X-Files episode as one example. But when it comes to incubus, or incubi in general, they're not usually given the greatest of displays. It's very rare that they're actually portrayed as somebody who has that charm and everything like that. They're usually made to be fairly ugly, but there is actually, I forget what the name is off the top of my head.
Reminds me, there was actually a great episode of, there's a show I watched called The Magicians, which I'm just going to shamelessly plug because it's awesome. But that probably some of the best uses of folklore and mythology and the way they handle things, because it weaves in, like they use all kinds of stuff. They had an episode where they had to go to an incubus and get help from him, and the guy's like a stock trader, and
Makes sense.
he's telling them, he tells them no, he's like that's a stereotype. He's like, I don't even like sex, he said stress is a much better thing for me, so that's what I feed on, and it's like. And it was funny the way it was, just this typical kind of Wall Street guy in the suit and whatnot, and they wound up.
So they were talking to Scaramucci?
Almost. Yeah, kind of like that, but like Gordon Gekko, as an incubus. It was really fun. I mean, the show is great. They had Bacchus on there. They had to go find him. And he was just the biggest bro. Like, that's how they portray. He was just this 20-something looking,
right.
party boy, and it was hilarious, and it was so well done. But Again,
yeah.
good show to watch, but they bring in a lot of this stuff, and it just reminded me that this is one instance where they did actually portray the
Yeah, and there's-
incubus in kind of a
Actually, it's really
Good light.
hilarious watching shows like that, or Supernatural, because Supernatural doesn't get all of it right.
no, but they do have fun.
They do try. Like they'll pull in some like obscure, and I mean obscure, figures.
Yeah.
Like in season 1, they pull out Yaksha or Rakshasa.
Yes.
Which
Good stuff.
It was a good episode, but it's like I'm saying, going, I don't recall anything about bronze. And it's a very obscure reference in and of itself.
They may have pulled
And they
something
were-
out of some legend somewhere, or just made it up.
Well, no, even with that, the legends that do mention bronze don't actually say that it will actually kill them. It's just that it has an effect. That doesn't mean it's a
Maybe
negative
they-
effect on them, or
maybe they
whether it
don't like
powers
it.
or it could just boost them. They
Yeah.
may get power from it. It's not actually clear. And then there's later episodes where they actually go with the Fae, which is also like Kevin's favorite theory that a lot of the UFO sightings are actually Fae screwing with people.
That would make a certain amount of sense. I mean, because it's a lot easier in as much as if you're going to believe any of it, it seems to me it's a little easier to believe creatures from some sort of overlapping dimension that that occasionally slip in here and have been here forever, as opposed to guys that somehow manage to travel like 1,000,000 or 1,000 light years or whatever, just to come here and do these weird little things that make like no sense, and somehow only a few people ever see them. It's always very like they're never spotted wide scale, and at this point it's kind of hard to believe with all the crap and satellites we've got up there that something wouldn't pick up something, because then you have to get into the whole worldwide government conspiracy thing, and you can't get all the governments in the world to agree on anything, much less holding a secret like that. So
But to be
I would
fair,
honestly tend to believe the fairy thing quicker than the UFO thing.
But to be fair, I do enjoy the fact that we had probably the tallest leprechaun in that particular episode, because it was the doctor from Voyager.
Oh, Robert Picardo.
Yes. I'm sort of going,
Fantastic actor. Also played one of the great werewolves of all time in The Howling.
I haven't seen The Howling.
Oh my God, you should. It's one of the... It created the standing werewolf-looking, like the modern werewolf that we tend to think of that looks like a wolf but stands on 2 legs.
The bipedal.
That was the movie that first did it. Until then, it was all either Lon Chaney-style Wolfman or wolves.
Or American Werewolf in London style.
Well, yeah, that was still pretty much a wolf. It was just kind of a hellhound wolf.
However, the transformation
And they were
sequence
done-
did win
yeah.
awards, like a great amount of awards, because after that was when they started moving into CGI, so
Well,
there's been nothing like that stuff.
That and The Howling were done right around the same time, like within a year of each other.
Fair enough.
Also, The Howling it's a great old movie. The script is fantastic. All the characters in it are named after directors from the old Universal movies, like the old Universal werewolf movies.
kind of like when they redid House on Haunted Hill, they changed the millionaire's name to Price. That's a homage to Vincent Price.
They slipped in, but
He looked a lot like Vincent Price in that one, though.
Yeah, he did. That was
I
deliberate.
love that.
But yeah, The Howling has like lots of little homages and little callbacks to things. It's just a wonderful movie if you like werewolves and werewolf legends. It handles it better than most.
I'll take a look.
I have a copy. I can give it to you. But
I'll
yeah,
see if Netflix
Robert
has it
Picardo,
first.
one of his early movies, is playing a werewolf serial killer in that movie,
Nice.
and he's fantastic.
Oh.
So yeah, I love him. He's a great actor. But as far as in American Gods, the leprechaun in that is also an extremely tall, red-haired, Irish guy who just likes to start fights and gets really offended if you start bringing up like traditional leprechaun, folklore stuff.
Actually, funnily enough, the whole Irish people all have red hair. No, that's not Irish, honey. That's typically more Scottish.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
just-
People forget
or reddish hair.
there was a lot of inbreeding. There was an entire clan of of Scottish that moved and relocated to Ireland and started living there.
Some of
the
it came
Scotch
in
Irish.
that way, but it was still far more prominent in Scotland back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, the red-haired Irish thing is more of just a trope, but they happen to get an actor that.
To be fair, when you hear somebody speak and they happen to have a brogue or a lilt, whatever it is, most people, especially here in the States, can't tell the difference, so they automatically assume Irish and completely forget Scotland exists.
Which pisses the Scottish off to no end.
You know, it made somebody. My mom, a couple years ago, she was working somewhere, and she was talking to one of the customers for the company she was working at. And after a few moments, she looks at him and she goes, "Scottish?" And he's like, "How could you tell?" She goes, "I know how to tell a brogue from a lilt."
Yeah.
And he was so happy.
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't help that in Ireland there are like several different accents, like even different parts of, there's like northern Dublin and southern Dublin, and they have completely different accents. And the one that people think of, the sort of Lucky Charms leprechaun sort of accent, almost doesn't exist there. It's like apparently a very small regional accent from, I think, Cork or Limerick, but it became popular or famous because of a particular actor in Hollywood. Just like the Talk Like a Pirate, came from one actor. Well, one actor in a couple of pirate movies doing a really bad impression of an English accent from a certain region, and it turned into the pirate accent.
Well,
Real pirates didn't talk like that.
Well, it also depends on where the pirate was from.
Yeah. Arr, matey.
I'm Maron. I know a couple of pieces of Gaelic, but the one that I particularly like using is not safe for radio.
Sure it is. Nobody will understand it except in Ireland.
There's a funny story that goes along with that phrase, which maybe as like a bonus thing, I'll tell that story. But there was actually something I was gonna say. Damn, what was it?
Welcome to Tangent Encyclopedia.
Pretty much. Because when we were, what were we talking? About like certain actors were embodiments and whatnot. There's I'm an anime nerd as well as a crack addict, Craig. Which, if you say that over in Ireland, it means you're having a bit of fun.
Yeah, crack. That's something. Yeah, crack.
Just be careful saying that to the police over here.
Yeah, it's spelled very differently. But yeah, crack is a term for fun.
There's an anime character that when they did the dubbing for, because of how his lips were moving, they had to have something that was very fast. And for some reason, there's this stereotype that all Irish people talk really, 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 really fast, which is not true, because I work with an Irish woman.
No, they're again, it's a regional thing. It's just like us with, the difference between like sort of a Maine northeastern accent and like a southern accent. There are different regions in Ireland, and they sound very different. My sister
went to Oklahoma, spoke at a normal pace, and people in Oklahoma say, "You need to." It's like, listen, Yank, you talk way too fast. I've gotten that numerous times over the phone on the few instances I'm talking to somebody from the U.S. At work. But
we actually do. Apparently, we have a certain, in the Northeast especially, and the cities and whatnot, it lends us to speaking more rapidly and with more intensity than in other places.
Well,
so
that could be an imprint of the the Industrial Revolution, because everything had to be fast paced. That's a cultural thing.
And that's still the way it is. Everybody wants everything hurry up, whereas in other parts of the country it's not so much like that.
As I was saying, so they gave this character a very fast pace, and because of how fast paced it was, and this was like normal speaking, mind you, his voice was a couple notes higher than you would normally expect it to be, especially when he was really, really rambunctious. And we had a friend of ours who was watching this particular series of episodes from the show for the first time. And anybody who's curious, it is Yu Yu Hakusho during the Dark Tournament fighting Jin, when Yusuke's fighting Jin. And
no idea.
The amount of stereotypes that proceeded to fall out of my friend's mouth imitating this character was ridiculous. I'm sitting there going, I heard about it afterwards because he was watching with my sister, and I'm sitting there he was telling me about it afterwards, and it's like, and he was playing on the whole, Irish are alcoholics, which they're not. You know, and they love their potatoes, which is like, no, oh my God, stop. 10 guys to stop. But it's like, you know, these are the stereotypes that a lot of them are like stuck with, especially if we go back to the leprechaun. Everybody thinks of it as this tiny little green man all in green and whatnot. And it's like, he used to go around in a red coat, by the way. Back in the day, and then over time he started switching back and forth, and then especially here in the States, it's clung to.
Well, a lot of things got you know, completely mutilated in the United States. Like a lot of our St. Patrick's Day customs are completely wrong. For instance, corned beef.
Corned beef and cabbage.
Yeah, more or
and
less
potatoes.
unknown in Ireland.
Yeah,
They used to use bacon. They didn't have corned beef. It's a Jewish thing. They found it here in
who
America.
ran the butcher shops when they came over here?
Yeah, exactly. They bacon was more expensive, you know, over here, so they started having to change it out and use the corned beef, which was not expensive. But
you know,
yeah,
it's
you
still
go
tasty,
you go over to Ireland, you won't find corned beef and cabbage or anything like that.
I just find how like on social media, every year, without fail, I will come across in some form or another, typically on Facebook. I'm wondering if I'm going to find any of it on Twitter this year, which that would be pretty awesome. There was a woman who's a bartender over in Ireland, and she goes on this rant about American tourists, who, they go, everybody's Irish on St. Patty's Day, No, this is about our, and she like laid it out about, you know, their independence and this, that, and the other thing. And granted, that would probably more apply to where you are in Ireland.
Yeah.
But since I think most of the...
Well, but it's like anything else. There's all this talk about cultural appropriation and stuff. And some of that St. Patrick's Day stuff really, you know, can get offensive if you really think about it and look at it. It is cultural appropriation. You're basically just... I mean, if we walked around and said, you know, hey, everybody's African American on Martin Luther King's birthday, and we started walking around, you'd get your ass kicked. So, you know, again, it's one of those things where it's something that needs to catch up. It's like certain things we still think it's okay to do it with. You know, Native Americans still get a bunch of their stuff, you know, taken for granted and jacked and appropriated.
Oh yeah.
And that's not right. And it's really not right to do it, you know, with anybody, the Japanese, the Chinese, you know, any kind of culture.
Yeah, no, there was a...
You don't just try to take it and say, oh, it's...
Or it's the people that are who are not of that particular culture who are saying, oh, this person is culturally appropriating. Like, there was a thing not that long ago, and it actually keeps surfacing up on Facebook, where it shows a picture of a little girl who is dressed up in a kimono, has proper makeup on, to have a tea ceremony.
Yeah.
And this one chick goes off about how this is cultural appropriation, this is not okay,
Right.
Somebody who was actually Japanese said, are you kidding? She is properly immersing herself. This is what she's doing right. She's 5.
And
she wanted a proper tea party.
And that's a big part of the argument.
You know,
and that's where I do take issue with other liberals, as, you know, even being one. And I say, you know, you do have to look at it in context. If something's being done with respect, if you're participating in a culture's, you know, ceremony or traditions or whatever, you know, that's fine. There's no reason that, you know, you can't take part in something or you can't respect what some other culture does. Taking it now, wearing like the Halloween costume of like, you know, hey, look at me, I'm, you know,
a chief.
I'm the big brave Indian chief wearing like the feather headdress, and you're basically mixing things from like 5 different tribes and just calling yourself a generic Indian and running around going woo, 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 you know, which is...
They had to make up a 13th tribe that had nothing to do with the original tribes for Voyager, for Chakotay. They had to do that because the tribes actually got up in arms about it, because they didn't want anything...
Well, they created this like South American tribe for him that, you know, didn't really exist.
They consulted with them about what would be okay with them ahead of time before him, but when they first found out what his background was supposed to be, they were furious. They also wouldn't let it be shown what his spirit animal was, for that reason, which actually brings me to another point. There was something else that was going around, trying to essentially police people's beliefs to some extent. It was about how, how some people go, oh, so and so, or this thing here, or this particular animal is my spirit animal, in some aspect. Meaning you're like channeling what that is, and that's how most people are utilizing it. But there are people that are getting up in arms about it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And it's essentially, because I read one of the biggest rants about it, and it essentially boils down to, if you yourself did not from birth originate from that tribe in some aspect, you have no place using this. And I take issue with this on a very small basis. I'm pagan, and having connection to a particular type of spirit, whether it is animal, whether it's some sort of humanoid or anything like that.
Right, and I would agree with you. There are
a lot of people that are like, Chuck Norris is my spirit animal for like no other reason than, they have like the mighty neck beard. And
well,
it's like,
and again,
no.
and part of it is it's a meme. It's a social. It's become like spirit animal or whatever has become almost a slang for something that you identify with.
It does.
And maybe that's not right, but you can't police everybody to the point where, because if you examine anything long enough, you can find something wrong with it. The question is really, it comes down to, for me, anyway, it comes down to intent. What is your intent with it? It's like are you mocking the culture or the place that originally came from? If so, then you're probably wrong. If not, if you're doing it from a place of respect and you're just using a term, because people borrow foreign terms to describe things all the time.
Like chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah. It's like, oh, are you not Jewish? You can't use that word. No, of course.
There are people,
it's like
or
language
Yiddish
borrows
and
from
like
each
that.
other.
Like, like the amount of words in Yiddish that are essentially meant for describing male genitalia is hilarious. And it's usually an insult to putz.
Wonderful word. Putz. Yeah.
But
some great terms
or
there.
Or even like my one sister, she is, like I was saying before, like she's as I mentioned beforehand, as a Hellenic priestess. Has been one for 20 years. She is also Native American and everything like that. I broached this with her because we are both pagans, and she goes, and especially because the particular rant, I showed her that, and the way it was written was essentially white people stay out. It's like, no, that's not fair to anybody. And and she uses
any sort of exclusionism, it usually doesn't work. It's like you should always look to try to include others in things rather than try to say, oh, well, this is ours, you can't have it. It's like, as long as somebody respects what you have and what you are. Like, I'm Irish. I'm Irish and Hungarian, and as I said, a number of other things. I'm the first one to laugh at at some kind of like jokes and things like that. And it's
same here.
It doesn't bother me because it's like that's this idea of racial identity, for one, is mostly something that we've made up. It's race doesn't really have a scientific basis. There is no race of this and race of that. People have intermarried and invaded. And,
even in different pantheons.
All the stuff for
I guarantee you, if there was a pop quiz right now, and here's a pop quiz for everybody at home. What does Set from Egypt look like? No, seriously. What does Set from Egypt look like?
Gerard Butler.
That is hot as hell, but no.
What, you never saw Gods of Egypt?
I did not see Gods of Egypt.
Oh yeah, it's
I didn't
awesome.
have a chance to, but
it's the Egyptian pantheon played as Power Rangers. It's amazing. It's hilarious, but it's
kind of like Troy was supposed to be like some weird. It was a complete flop in his of itself. Everybody hates that movie.
Troy was so sad. It could have been cool. They tried to do like
they ruined a lot.
Well, they did the Iliad, and they tried to do it by taking all the gods out of it and making it like just some sort of realistic war movie, but they still failed.
They failed on so many fronts, and it's just no. So to answer the question for what does Set look like, Set is pale with red hair and green eyes, which doesn't match most of the members there. And even up in the north, there's actually, I forget who it is, but there's a very prominent figure in, it's like, I think it's like Norse mythology, maybe Greek. I forget if it's like Greece or Norse, offhand, but
Probably
they're
Greece.
really, well, no, even further north, because that kind of
'cause
paleolithic wasn't normal in
Because
Greece
what I was saying,
either.
the Greeks had a thing. People with red hair and pale skin and gray eyes were Virkolakos. They were vampires.
Well, yes, they did, but I was saying, I think it was like further north, and again, but it's like that person was very, very dark skinned, looked like nothing like the rest of the pantheon. So it's sort of like saying, oh well, keep your stuff here, keep your stuff there, and it's like
people,
no,
people
it
appropriated
interchanges.
gods and change. I mean, even the Egyptians, what we think of as the classic Egyptian pantheon, really evolved from way back when Egypt was hundreds of separate little kingdoms, and eventually one would conquer the other, and another, and they would take those people's one god that was like their
Well, they did
primary
that with
god
Maya and
bring them
Aztec
in
to a degree too.
Yeah,
Mostly
most
Inca
cultures
and Maya,
did. I'm
I
sure
think.
the Greek pantheon emerged as different places joined together and
I'm not
traded.
sure what happened with the
and-
Romans, because they had the Etruscans, and then just suddenly out of nowhere, nope, we're taking everybody else's and we're leaving this behind. It's
Well,
like, what?
the Romans kind of took the Greek gods and said, "We like the idea. We're going to change all the names."
It's like,
That
we
was
like
cultural
this,
appropriation
we like
on a
this
massive
more.
scale.
And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Now the Romans knew how to do cultural appropriation. Yeah.
Don't take after the Romans, kids. Parable of the day. They're a reason half of this. They're a good reason why faith is a big contention point for a lot of people, or at least the most prominent one.
Although the Romans, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, indoor plumbing, the aqueducts. Yeah.
Well, such concepts were
government, road
There's actually
maintenance.
an interesting series on
public
Netflix called Pyramid Riddle or something like that. I forget the name of it, and my sister's gonna smack me because she told me it like at least 5 times, and I actually need to start watching it. And it's going into alternate theories of why certain structures were built the way they were over in Egypt. Like the one pyramid was supposed to be in certain parts. The way it's constructed looks like it's supposed to be part of something greater, and was actually supposed to be some sort of energy conduit instead, and things like that.
There's so many theories about the pyramids, and then there's all the different pyramids that appeared in other structures, or other cultures around the world, and people are like, oh, it's it's mystical and what. No, it's also just a really efficient way for an ancient culture to sort of put a building together that goes high.
Well, think of it this way: like the first settled peoples, if you look at some of their houses, they have such disproportionate everything.
Well,
and then you get over to like Sumer and Babylon, and where Babylon is, and like the I forgot the word. Essentially, their pyramids.
Architecture.
Well, no, like those not only were like at the top, was that where the temples were, but it was also because that particular area at that time, this is before the Tigris and the Euphrates like shifted so sharply, and is practically dried up at this point. At least last I checked the map. I could be wrong. But before it shifted as far as it did, they would get flash floods out of nowhere. They had no way of predicting it. You're dealing with very rudimentary technology. So whenever a flood was supposed to have come, especially when it came to rains and things like that, people would go up the I want to say Zenith, but that's not it. But they would go up the ziggurat. Thank you. They would go up the ziggurat in order to try to stay out from under the flood.
Yeah.
Because according to them, when there was random floods, that is when the gods were saying, okay, we're going to clear out some of you because you're becoming too populous and you might overthrow us. No. Which that was always an interesting concept. The Sumerians have a very interesting place in history for the actual people.
I just realized it's now 7:34. So
Is it?
on that note about pyramids, that concludes our episode on the Fae and angels.
They go everywhere. Both groups.
Fairy pyramids. The
They have them.
fairies built the pyramids. There we go. It ties together.
All right, everybody.
All
This
right,
has
so
been Paranormal Encyclopedia. For what it's worth.
I've been your temporary host, Brian McKinley, our wonderful producer.
Hey, have a good one, everybody.
All
Be
right.
safe.
Good
Especially
night.
with the storm coming up.
Yeah, I noticed.